Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, on the line with Steve Deace, Michigan podcast. Please check him out, and that would be on your favorite audio platform or right here on YouTube. Looking at championship weekend, Steve, the best game should be in the SEC with the most talent on one field. Obviously, we've got the comparison to make between most likely an Oklahoma Big 12 champion and a Utah Pac-12 champion, which is going to fascinate me because the committee right now is telling us that Utah is graded to be slightly better than Oklahoma, although the Oklahoma State win by the Sooners this past weekend may nudge them ahead of Utah as a better win on the final regular season weekend. But based on the resumes and where they have them currently stacked, it would appear to be a beauty contest between the two during the championship play over the weekend. And then, of course, Ohio State trying to avoid it, an upset, and then the give me that is the ACC championship game. So what is going to intrigue you the most this weekend?
I think LSU will have too much offensive firepower for Georgia. I don't think they'll put up a 40 burger on them, but I think because Georgia's defense is too good, but I think there's too many limitations at the receiver position for Georgia that I don't think they can get to, say, 31 points in that game. So I like LSU to win that game, probably around where the point spread is, 7 to 10 points. I think Utah, if it beats Oregon, is going to get in, unless Oklahoma can do a Ohio State 2014 on Baylor and just name the score. But I don't think they will, because I actually think Baylor's going to win that game. I was very impressed with the way Baylor came out against Kansas and just had no mess, all focus, total business. I think the way they picked themselves back up the very next week after that crushing loss to Oklahoma at home against Texas. I think that they've got a second wind, and I think they're better in the trenches on both sides of the line, by the way. So I think Baylor is going to win that game against Oklahoma on Saturday, and so which will end all this debate. But I think the only real debate is if Utah wins on Friday night, Oklahoma, I think, has to put on a 2014 level of performance in order to justify overcoming that. That's just my read.
And what you mentioned about Baylor is another credit to Matt Rule, that his team was basically slipping by opponents leading into that Oklahoma game. They have the disaster of the 25-point lead blown. They come back the very next week, and they played their best football since then.
Yeah, they've actually been their most dominant football since that. Absolutely, yeah.
And then to make the comparison between, of course, we're discarding Baylor, and the reason we're discarding them is it appears as though everyone else in the selection committee is as well. Mm-hmm. But I know that the non-conference schedule is deplorable, but I could make the argument that if Baylor wins the Big 12 championship, having avenged its loss, much like Oklahoma did last year versus Texas in the Big 12 championship game, that Baylor's wins are more impressive than Utah's. They're not more dominant, impressive in that fashion, but they have more quality wins than Utah. And Utah's big non-conference win was BYU. Big deal. A 50th or 60th best team in the country versus Baylor playing a bunch of bottom 5 to 10 teams in the FBS.
I don't disagree with you. I don't. So I'm giving analysis based on what I think the committee thinks, not necessarily what I think. I don't disagree with any of that, but this isn't a playoff. It's a highly subjective process. It's an invitational with a star chamber. There's no a playoff. There's a way that you could play your way in or out. There is no way to play your way in or out here. That no one has any clue. They're not transparent. We don't know what any of the methodology is on any level whatsoever. And it's often just a reverse engineering of kind of what they think the field ought to be. And so on a week-to-week basis, let's come up with the rationale to get us to the point that we want to go. And so I mean, you don't even, we've had all these conversations before. You don't even have a net ranking or an RPI, any form of an objective net framework that would bring any transparency to this process. It makes the NCAA tournament selection committee look like the Continental Congress. All right. So it's a total subjective star chamber process. It's an invitational, and the committee has made it clear that They believe Utah is better, and the analytics say Utah is better. The resume would say Baylor in this scenario would be, or Oklahoma for that matter. So, but here's the thing: I'd be fine with that if they were consistent, and they're not. Sometimes with some teams, in some weeks, it's the resume, and others it's the analytics. Then it's the analytics before it's the resume. After it's the resume, following the analytics. They just have an idea of what they want to do, and then they just come up with whatever rationale they need to justify it that way.
Yeah, last year they had to make the decision between Oklahoma Big 12 champion and Ohio State Big 10 champion. In my eyes, Ohio State was the more complete team with the better wins. Obviously, Oklahoma got to avenge its loss and also did not have the embarrassing loss that Ohio State, and so they made that decision. And they may well have to do the same thing this year between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. All right, Steve Deace, Michigan podcast. Again, I encourage you to get on over there to check out Steve's work on a weekly basis. Steve, we appreciate you dropping by.
You bet, man. Take care. Always good to talk to you, Mark.